Okay, so we are recording. So welcome everyone to the fourth segment of the ORCID US Community Showcase webinar series. My name is Sheila Rabin. I'm the ORCID US Community Specialist at Lyrasis. I'm going to start us off today by giving a brief overview of ORCID and the ORCID US community, and then we'll hear from Shauna Sadler at ORCID with a brief global overview. And then very special today, we have featured panelists that will each give us a case study on how ORCID is being used at their institutions, specifically in research information systems. So many thanks to our presenters, Mark Zuloff at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Tiffany Phillips at Florida State University, and Julie Shedd and Marianne Jones at Mississippi State University. Then we'll wrap up with discussion and questions at the end. So if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat, and then we'll make sure to address all the questions at the end of the session. So to get us started and make sure we're all on the same page, and just as a brief review, ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor Identifier. And an ORCID ID is a unique persistent identifier to distinguish individuals from each other. An ORCID ID is formatted as a URI, so it works in linked data environments. And it links back to an ORCID record that can contain information about the individual's employment, education, works, funding, and other biographical details, contributions, and activities. So what you're seeing here is an example from my ORCID record. ORCID is different from other researcher identifiers because it's not tied to any institution or platform. ORCID is an independent nonprofit organization, and ORCID IDs stay with an individual over the entire course of their career, despite changes in name, institution, career, location, etc. But ORCID is more than just name disambiguation, though. The ORCID registry and infrastructure actually provides a mechanism for interoperability between systems and workflows in the scholarly communication ecosystem that require data about individuals, their affiliations, and their contributions. ORCID IDs are being increasingly used in funding, publishing, and research reporting workflows, not only to distinguish individuals from each other, but also as a time-saving approach to transferring data across the research and scholarly communication landscape. The ORCID API, or Application Programming Interface, is based on OAuth 2.0, and that's what really allows organizations to get the most value from ORCID. It allows you to read data from and write data to affiliated researchers' ORCID records with the permission of that researcher, and that reduces administrative burden in application and reporting processes and contributes to the integrity of the metadata in this ecosystem. So you can think of the ORCID API kind of like a puzzle piece that connects different systems within a single institution, but also connects systems across multiple organizations. Systems that have been integrated with the ORCID API can be configured to automatically update ORCID records and connected systems when other organizations make updates in ORCID. So it's really meant to streamline data flow across systems and organizations, all with the permission of the individual researcher. And because ORCID is structured like an ecosystem, all of the stakeholders really need to be involved in order for everyone to get the most benefit. For research institutions specifically, there are three equally important components that are needed to help both the institution and individual researchers benefit from ORCID. The first one is gaining internal stakeholder support in order to prioritize ORCID adoption and the activities that go along with that. The second one is integrating the ORCID API with local systems. And the third one is doing outreach and education to your researchers, to your faculty, students, about ORCID so that they know what ORCID is, they'll get and use their ORCID IDs. And that's especially important because researchers are central to the ORCID system. So in the US, we have a national ORCID consortia for research institutions called the ORCID US Community. And this community was formed in January of 2018 when Lyrasis, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, the Northeast Research Libraries, and the Greater Western Library Alliance joined forces to form a national partnership for ORCID membership, with Lyrasis serving as the administrative lead. So as part of this partnership, I work to provide dedicated technical and community support for all of our members, including support for advancing the goals of the ORCID US community, which include fostering a community of practice around ORCID in the US, establishing communication channels and enabling member institutions to share with each other, and make it as easy as possible for institutions to adopt ORCID. And really, I'm here to make sure that institutions are getting the most value from their ORCID membership. And so this webinar is part of our resources and community building and sharing what other institutions are doing. So currently we have 123 member organizations in the ORCID US community. Most are universities. We do have a few research institutes as well. And now I'm actually going to hand it over to Shauna Sadler at ORCID, and she will tell you a little bit more about kind of the global view and the bigger picture of ORCID membership and adoption.
Thanks so much, Sheila. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
So I have to go to share screen and then go to presentation. Hey everybody, it's lovely to meet you. My name's Shauna Sadler. I'm the engagement manager for the Americas with ORCID. So that means my portfolio responsibility is North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. I can say the ORCID community in the US has just been so fantastic. It's just been a really exciting, dynamic group. So as Sheila mentioned, Lyrasis has 123 members, but the US overall has 233 members. So that includes some service providers, some government agencies, some of the funding agencies. It's just fantastic. And it's just this wonderful, energetic group. I have listed here the 31 publishers and associations. So it's just been fantastic. US is one of the best in the world for the system integration. So as Sheila mentioned, it's great that we have lots of researchers with ORCID IDs and lots of members, but one of the hardest parts is getting those, especially the universities, to connect their ORCID service, their membership, to the different systems that they use to collect the data. And it's really important that everybody knows that members can both read that data from the ORCID registry, and they can also write to the registry to help improve the data in the registry. So just quickly, in the Americas region, Canada has a consortia, the US has 2, Mexico's doing really well, Brazil has a very exciting consortia. We're talking to Peru and Chile, Colombia about consortia down there too. So it's really gaining momentum, and actually Costa Rica is starting to have some great conversations. So it really is an across the Americas conversation. And then internationally, with ORCID, we've just assigned, we've crested 7 million ORCID IDs to researchers around the world. So it's an incredible movement. And overall, we have just over 1,000 members, 21 consortia, just tremendous. It's important though, I think the US, it's clear to say that it has the most memberships in the world. The UK, they're coming up close. So so we want to keep the US going as #1 with the memberships in the world, but it's going really well. And Sheila, can I pass it on to your next presenter?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Shauna. So if you just click end or stop share, we'll now switch into our local case study. So next up, we're going to hear from Mark Zuloff at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a case study about what they're doing with ORCID there. And that looks perfect, Mark. We can see your screen. Do you want to go ahead? I guess we should make sure you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you, Sheila.
Perfect.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon from the cornfields here in Illinois. My name is Mark Zuloff, and I am the Researcher Information Systems Coordinator for the Scholarly Communication and Publishing Unit of the University Library here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And as is the case with everyone else on the line, research is a core part of what we do here on the Urbana-Champaign campus. Beyond the nearly 2,000 tenure track faculty that we employ, we have thousands more specialized and emeriti faculty, postdoctoral scholars, graduate students, and other classifications of researchers hard at work on our campus. And as you all likely know, effectively and efficiently managing the various data about their research activity can be quite the challenge. So one part of our attempt to meet this challenge of managing all that data has been to implement the Elsevier Pure research information management software that supports the public Pure portal for researcher profiles, and which we have locally branded as Illinois Experts. The implementation of this of Elsevier Pure is the result of a joint effort between the University Library and the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research. And we also maintain a subscription to Elsevier's Scopus citation and abstract database, which allows us to connect the two systems and receive an automated weekly import of publications data. Pure is also the first campus system that we have integrated with ORCID. Illinois is an ORCID member through the Big Ten Academic Alliance and the Lyricist Consortium, which provides us with premium access to ORCID's API. And over time, as the ORCID API has evolved, so too has the functionality available to us through the Pure ORCID integration. And in my remaining slides, I'm going to cover the basics of that functionality. So today I have a couple of brief scenarios that I'd like to run through in order to demonstrate how Pure might interact with ORCID. And in this first scenario here, let's assume that we have a researcher who has not yet obtained an ORCID ID. Because we've plugged our API credentials into the Pure administrative backend, our researchers are able to log into their profile workspace and open the profile editing window, which is what you see here on the screen. And they're able to see ORCID's create or connect link, which I have circled here. And when clicked on, that link will begin the process of taking the researcher over to ORCID from within the Pure profile editing window. So first, the researcher will see a brief explanation outlining what's about to happen and what they're being asked to agree to. And then they're taken to the ORCID registration page where, as you might be able to see here on the screen, although it's tiny, the first few fields have already been pre-populated with data from Pure, including the researcher's first and last names and institutional email address. So at this point, the researcher just needs to create an ORCID password, determine the visibility settings for the content that will be added to their Pure profile, and then move on to the next step, at which point they're asked to grant permission for the Elsevier Pure / Illinois Experts software to exchange data with ORCID. Once they have responded to that quest, hopefully they've authorized it, the researcher is then taken back to their Pure profile editing screen from which they started. And as you can see here, hopefully the new ORCID ID has been inserted into the researcher's profile. And at this point, they'll need to save out of that window in order to retain that information. So here, at this step in the process, we have on the left-hand side the researcher's Pure profile that now displays an ORCID ID immediately below their name and campus affiliations. They've also created on the right-hand side of the screen an ORCID profile that is currently lacking in content, but we can get content in there pretty quickly by exporting profile content out of Pure and into ORCID. So one way we can do that is to set up a cron job on the back end. Set up a cron job on the back end that will export content from authorized profiles on a routine schedule. But the author also has the option to manually export from their own profile by returning to the profile editing window, where they will now see an export button to the right of their ORCID ID. And upon clicking that button, pretty instantaneously and seamlessly, several bits of content are sent over to the researcher's ORCID profile. In addition to the publications data or the works section of the ORCID profile that was added from Pure, We've also added their institutional affiliation with the official version of our institution's name. And then underneath their name and their ORCID ID on the left-hand side of the ORCID profile, you can see that there has been added a link that directs viewers back to the Illinois Experts Elsevier Pure profile. And below that are added any other research identifiers that may have been available in the Pure profile. And those are linked to their affiliated platforms as well. So this first scenario is one way to quickly and easily help a researcher obtain an ORCID ID and to expand their professional online footprint. In our second scenario, we're going to go the opposite direction. Let's assume that the researcher has previously created an ORCID ID and has begun adding publications to their ORCID profile. At this point, especially with a faculty member who is new to campus, we've started the work of creating their profile in Pure, but we likely don't have publications content there yet, as you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen. And it's possible that some of their publications possibly are not indexed in Scopus. And so Pure allows for other ways of getting publications data into the researcher's profile, including a variety of import options, of which ORCID is one. So this process starts out pretty similar to our previous one, where the researcher logs into the backend, clicks the Create or Connect ORCID link, and then they'll be taken through the process of connecting their existing ORCID to their Pure profile and authorizing the exchange of data. Once that happens, within the researcher's workspace in the Pure backend, again, they have access to a variety of import modules, and ORCID is available as one of those. And so going that route, the researcher is able to search and identify publications in their ORCID profile and then import those into their Pure profile. The difference here is that unlike moving from Pure into ORCID, it unfortunately can't be done all at once. The publications are imported one at a time, but it is still a fairly quick and efficient process for getting publications content into the Pure profile. And so here is where we see the result of that. On the left-hand side is the researcher's Pure profile. There's now an ORCID ID available, and the publications data has been ported over from ORCID. So this is my final slide, and I was asked to briefly recap what our next steps are regarding ORCID integration. And we've been talking for a while on this campus about integrating ORCID with our identity management system, and it's been recently that we've started to get serious about that process. And so I expect that initiative will start to gain momentum as we continue throughout the fall term. During which time we will also be planning and preparing our educational and promotional outreach efforts, which will be coordinated by both the library and through the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research. So that is the end of my section. I will remain on the line and be available for questions at the end. But now I'm going to hand things back to our colleagues down in Florida.
Wonderful, thank you, Mark. That's perfect. The identity management system integration, I think, is right in line with what we're seeing kind of trending in the US right now, which is focusing on a centralized ORCID integration that either works with an identity management system or an HR system. So that's wonderful, and we'll be excited to see how that unfolds. So next up, we're gonna hear from Tiffany Phillips at Florida State University and see what they're doing with ORCID and their research management.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Phillips. I am an IT support specialist in our Office of Faculty Development and Advancement here at Florida State University. We are a top research university, again, like the others here. We have recently joined the top 20 national public universities, according to the U.S. News and World Report. So we're very proud of that fact. Just a very brief explanation. Florida State University has approximately 2,000 full-time faculty members, and including the part-time faculty, we have about 2,500 faculty. Depending on the breakdown of your part-time versus instructional faculty, of course. But we have approximately 8,000 graduate students and a total of 41,700 students across undergraduate, graduate, and professional levels. And of course, we do have all of our facts on our institutional research site that you are hopefully seeing on the screen right now. So if you're interested in learning more about Florida State University, we have all kinds of numbers here for you to look at. So I'm going to switch over to the slide presentation. I've given a very, very simplistic diagram here that explains kind of how we have laid things out currently at FSU. We have a homegrown system that was built here in our office by our programmer, David Yancey. And we originally started the Faculty Expertise and Advancement System in 2009. And this system houses faculty research information, curriculum vitae information, including publications, grants, student committees, and so on. So you will see the Faculty Expertise and Advancement System, or what we call FEES, in the middle of this diagram here. Now, FEES, as I said, has been in existence for 10 years now. However, after we at FSU joined the ORCID Consortium, we decided to set up an integration with FEES to make things a little bit easier on our faculty to populate their information. So in November of last year, we actually created that connection with ORCID so that faculty members can actually log in using the OAuth system to retain their ORCID information within FEES and import any publications and works that they have. Now, currently at FSU, we have approximately 3,000 registered ORCID members that are actually associated with the fsu.edu domain. We are currently working on expanding our education and outreach. We do have an ORCID task force here on campus, of which I am one of about 7 staff members on campus that make up this task force. So we actually reach out to faculty and departments through various workshops. For instance, our new faculty orientation in August. This year, we actually had a session where we allowed faculty to sign up for an ORCID account. And if they already had some, which they did, they actually could make that connection and go ahead and start pulling their information in. And technically, they hadn't even started this semester yet. So we got a little jump start this year by doing so. And of course, we will be continuing that process. So brief explanation, again, you can see the Faculty Expertise and Advancement System in the middle of your screen there. They make the OAuth connection to ORCID to pull in their works. We do have various entities on campus that are, I guess, joint departments with us in the Faculty Development and Advancement Office. For instance, FSU Libraries and the the National High Magnetic Field Lab, which we affectionately call MAG Lab, all have interest and are developing connections with ORCID. What we are working toward in the future is, again, that central sign-on makes things a lot easier for our faculty members if they can sign on to simply one place and have their ORCID identity matched with their FSU identity. So we are currently working with our information technology services to create that centralized page. Right now, we are storing the ORCID information within fees, but we will actually be porting that over to this central sign-on page once it is ready toward the end of this semester. So hopefully that will be yet another additional incentive for our faculty to sign up. As I mentioned, we have multiple entities on campus that are interested in our ORCID connection and connecting faculty, and we will be reaching out as well to we have our Office of Research, in addition to the libraries and Mag Lab and our graduate school as well. We will be reaching out and making a campaign for our graduate students to be able to connect their work and our faculty members' work and be able to see their progression and, you know, once they move on to a full-time career, being able to see their path. So that's kind of a brief synopsis. I'm going to show you just a couple of slides from our Faculty Expertise and Advancement System. This is our homepage for our database. And by clicking on that little import button you see at the top of the screen, you see various ways that our faculty may import information, including from other FSU databases, such as our system that houses class information. They may use an EndNote or RefWorks BibTeX publications file, but as I said, we are doing a campaign to have them use the import ORCID function. Once they click on that, they'll be presented with a screen where if they do not yet have a connection already, they will be prompted to do so. This particular faculty member, as an example, has authenticated in ORCID, has passed back that security token and granted us trusted access. So this is what it looks like, and of course they can, a user may click on that link there to lead back to their ORCID profile. Once that connection is established, they can click on the button to import their works, and we actually do a comparison based on a couple of different factors: title, DOI, and just to ensure that we're not duplicating records within fees during that import process. So that's a screen capture here of what that looks like. So within the faculty members' preferences, they can also establish that trusted connection. So either they can go through the import process or they may go through their preferences to establish that. Again, as part of our outreach, we're doing workshops, sending out flyers to various departments and individuals. This is one of our handouts that we included in our new faculty orientation packet, explaining a little bit about ORCID for those who had not yet heard of it, and giving some basic instructions on how to actually create that account and how to link it to fees, showing how simple it is and including some resource information down at the bottom. We do have a LibGuide available that we are constantly adding to, and some of our contact information for staff support as well. My colleague on the ORCID task force here at FSU, Kelly Grove, is a wonderful librarian in our university libraries that has helped many of our faculty to actually begin to fill in their ORCID works, and to explain a little bit better about how ORCID actually can help them find their publications. And then my name, of course, at the bottom. I am always available to our faculty to help with that integration process and the import process into our faculty expertise and advancement system. So if you have any questions, I'm again going to stick around, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's great to see the ORCID integration in a homegrown system juxtaposed with the vendor system that we saw from UC. So excellent. Thank you so much. And we have one final case study to share with you today. We will be hearing from Julie Shedd and Marianne Jones at Mississippi State University. Perfect. I can see your screen.
Okay, so hi everyone. This is Marianne Jones, and I am our scholarly communication coordinator. I have only been in that position for a little less than 3 months, and so I'm really all new to this. Don't really have a slide for this, but just to give you a little bit of background on Mississippi State, we have about 22,000 students, a little more than that. That's a head count. We are a land grant institution. We have approximately 1,500 faculty members, and we also have 43 centers and institutes that are kind of affiliated with the university. So there's lots of research going on here on campus, and so we are doing our best in the library to try to help capture that for the institution. So really, I'm going to talk just a very brief few minutes about ORCID and then pass it off to Julie so she can talk about Vivo. That is completely her wheelhouse. So we have only been ORCID institutional members since January. We have been doing some promotional activities to get the word out. Like I said, I've only been in this position for a little less than 3 months, 2 of which were before school started. So I have only had a few weeks to kind of do some outreach to the 9-month faculty. So that is still ongoing. And we're trying to get people to know how to connect their personal ORCIDs with our institutional membership. So part of the reason that we're doing that is because the university has adopted digital measures as our kind of back end, keeping up with everybody's research, experts, that kind of thing. So what we're really trying to do here on this campus is make digital measures the one-stop place for faculty to input their data, so they don't have to populate multiple systems. So we are currently doing workshops. We are going to all of the research fairs. On the next slide, I'll show you a campus mailer that we've done. But basically, that's kind of how we're trying to implement ORCID here, is to try to connect it with digital measures. So this is just a quick view of how we're trying to get the word out. This is a postcard that we mailed out at the end of last semester to all of our faculty members and researchers on campus. And so that really is kind of how we're getting started with ORCID right now. And so I'm diving in head first, but trying to hold my breath right now. Anyways, I'll pass it over to Julie and let her talk about the integration with Vivo.
Thank you, Marianne. This is Julie Shedd. I'm coordinator of digital initiatives and web services here at MSU Libraries. We are a small team. It's myself, currently one developer in search of a second developer and a user experience person. So we don't have a big dedicated team, but we do what we can. So we first got started with Vivo when we were looking for a replacement for our project MSU Authors, and you can see a little screenshot of it there. It's extremely old. It was built in sometime in the early 2000s, and it has not changed very much over that time, but it's really just it's a bibliography of faculty authors at MSU where they can come and submit their publications, and we housed and listed those and made a list of them available to the public. And since it is so old and could use a bit of enhancement and a facelift, we decided to replace it, and we settled on Vivo to do that. And as we explored that, our goals became to incorporate the data that faculty enter in digital measures and the info that they're getting into ORCID, as well as the information that we already had in faculty authors. A number of the authors that we have listed in that website are either gone from the university or gone from this world. They have deceased. So we did not want to lose that information. That's really important historical information. But we wanted to use digital measures as our single source of truth going forward, so that we would not have to say to our faculty, here's one more thing that you have to do. We really wanted to reduce their workload while making them visible. So we wanted to use digital measures as our sole input source and promote ORCID as a way to present that information to everybody and have digital measures populate Vivo. In the early stages of this project, it caught the attention of our Associate Vice President for Research Development, Dr. Alan Parrish, and he convened a working group of several of us across campus who were working on very similar projects. Information Technology Service, our central IT, had been working with a couple of departments to create faculty directory pages that pulled from digital measures data. The Office of Public Affairs had worked on a sort of faculty experts website, which depended on faculty like MSU authors to come and input their data. And there are several other departments and research centers and offices across campus that were all just trying to do similar things. So he got us together in a room and we started working on what to do with Vivo. So we are still really early in this process, so I don't have a live website to show you. Our expectations have been threefold. First of all, we want to standardize faculty information. Our IT group and the Office of Public Affairs got together and worked on a standardized layout, which kind of takes off from Vivo's default theme. And that'll just be a way that faculty information can be displayed consistently across all departments. Their pilot was the College of Business. There's a link there and you can go and see what it looks like. But it's just really basic information about the person and some of their publications, their research interests. They also wanted to include these new synergy areas, which is a concept that they're working on, sort of a way to foster collaboration among people in different departments by grouping them into similar categories and subcategories. Secondly, we wanted to reduce workloads. So when Vivo goes live, the expectation is that OPA will be able to close that faculty expert site. They created it in response to demand, but it does take up a bit of time that they can spend elsewhere. Also, faculty won't have to know about that and go and submit their information to it. All they'll have to do is enter any information about themselves or their research into digital measures, and that will populate Vivo. and it will populate ORCID because we have ORCID integrated with digital measures as well. And finally, we wanted to enable discovery. MSU administrators, members of the public, funding agencies, they'll all be able to get a quick and more complete picture of research activity at MSU. They can just go to the Vivo site and look up a keyword and find everybody here who's working with that. And our researchers will be able to find collaborators in other departments and research centers across campus. And hopefully, just as like what happened with our project, we'll be able to de-silo some of this information and research and get people working together instead of working on separate things that are the same separately. So far, we've had a few successes. Dr. Parrish loves it. Everybody who's seen Vivo is very impressed by what it can do. And they especially like that it will lend a little bit more authority to the request to enter that research data into digital measures. As with everything that requires opt-in data entry by yourself, it is sometimes difficult to get people to do that. And you can't always just say you have to go do it. But if we demonstrate its value in this way, maybe people will be more likely to do that. Our librarians like it because it provides us with another way to help MSU researchers and get out there where they are as a resource to help get their work seen, get funded, get their information archived in our institutional repository, and just generally be a help. And we have gotten ORCID integrated into both Vivo and digital measures. It is there and it does work, so that is a success. We do also have some challenges that we're working with. First of all, the ORCID integration, I think we still have a little bit of work to do on that yet. Digital measures so far will only get publications and I think presentations from ORCID, so it doesn't get everything. And in Vivo, you can link each author's ORCID, but the researcher, the person has to log in and initiate that, or they have to log in and delegate that to somebody else, and that would be great. But we don't want researchers to have to log into Vivo. We want digital measures to be our sole source of information. So we aren't quite sure what to do about that yet. ORCID adoption is not quite widespread enough on campus to solely depend on ORCID and send people to ORCID as a way to populate both systems. But as Marianne pointed out, we are working on ways to market that, especially to new faculty. Third, Vivo implementation is a little bit difficult. As I mentioned, we only have one developer right now. Up until very recently, he was working full-time on Vivo, but we both have a lot of other projects, and neither of us have any previous RDF, XML, or Sparkle experience, so we've hit the point where we can't move forward until we learn to speak the language that Vivo speaks. So we have a lot of training to do before we can really get it finished. And finally, our VPs are considering purchasing academic analytics, and that has a forward-facing interface. And if they go with that, that pretty much moots everything that we've done with Vivo, in which case we don't know what the status of our project is if we need to continue with that. We don't have any information on that yet, but certainly even if we don't use it, it was good experience to get, and the training that we are receiving, we can still repurpose elsewhere. So if you want more information about what we're doing, we have a website for our efforts around ORCID and all of our other scholarly communication services, whether we have Vivo or something else, but that will eventually be linked on that page. So you may want to look out for that. And there are mine and Marianne's directory pages, and you can contact us using any of the methods listed on there. But thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie and Marianne. That's great. I heard a lot of great successes, but also challenges. And, you know, of course, I think it all makes a lot of sense. Let me just share my screen again and get us down to the questions portion. I have a few questions in my back pocket, but I will first open it up to see if any of our audience members have questions. And also, you know, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or type it into the chat. The screen that you're seeing here is just a reference point if you want to look at our ORCID US Community web pages or get in touch through email or follow on Twitter. If you are from a member organization, we also have a discussion forum. So if you're not already part of that, go ahead and send an email and I will get you joined into that discussion forum. But are there any questions from the audience at this point? And feel free to unmute yourself and just ask or type into the chat any questions for our presenters or questions about ORCID in general. All right, I see a question asking about any existing infrastructure for integrating ORCID and MySQL and or ORCID and Microsoft Access. I personally do not know off the top of my head of any existing infrastructure around those databases. However, the ORCID API is designed to be very configurable with any system or database that you may be working with. So ORCID does have a public API that is available for use as long as you have an ORCID ID. There's a developer tab within your ORCID record that you can access the ORCID public API that you could certainly experiment with. The public API is limited in that you would only be able to read public data from the ORCID registry, whereas the member ORCID API is available to organizations that are ORCID members, and that allows for a bit more functionality in terms of being able to read any limited access data from ORCID, but also writing to ORCID records where the researcher has granted that authorization. And so I think it would be entirely possible to experiment and build something using the ORCID API with MySQL and Microsoft Access, but off the top of my head, I don't know of any existing infrastructure mechanisms for that. Oh yeah, I'm also seeing a comment about Vivo working on expanding ORCID functionality. So thanks, Ralph, for typing that in. And actually, I just put out an announcement about how ORCID and Vivo work together. And so we have a video tutorial and a little blog post about that. And of course, there's also documentation for ORCID and Vivo on the DuraSpace wiki. So feel free to send an email to that orcidus@lyrasis.org if you are interested in getting links to those things. But yes, right now the ORCID and Vivo integration is possible, but there's of course more functionality that could be added there. So that's great to hear. All right, we're seeing more questions in the chat. So for all of our presenters, did you have any challenges approaching campus IT administrators about their concerns for security issues, about integrating with ORCID and integrating ORCID with other systems? Do any of our presenters want to unmute and answer that question?
I will say, in addition to what I already typed, that it actually made it easier for us at Florida State University to integrate due to the fact that we built our own system for the faculty expertise and advancement system. We unfortunately only have one developer as well, as I mentioned, David Yancey. He is listening in on the call, but he is actually out on medical leave, so I'm not going to put him on the spot. But he worked with our contacts at ORCID and Lyrasis to establish what protocols he needed using the API, and he also worked closely with our administrators for our system, which we call NetProd, that houses a lot of our web applications. So it was just a little bit of back and forth to just, placate our system administrators and work out what we needed to do for that OAuth. But no, we didn't really have any concerns from anybody in our ITS. It was more just, ironing out the details.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. Any other presenters? I'm actually seeing in the chat that our presenters have typed in, looks like there were not in general a lot of issues and concerns around security. The ORCID website does have documentation around system requirements and other considerations for getting started with an ORCID integration. So I'm actually going to share a link in the chat. And so this is a good starting point for looking at system requirements and other types of things as you might be considering integrating ORCID into your own systems. Any other questions, please feel free to pipe up or type in. While you're thinking about other questions, I will ask kind of a related question, which is for our presenters around, it sounds like I think all of our presenters, all of our institutions there had partnerships across campus between different stakeholder units, which is great. That is an emerging best practice for really looking at ORCID strategically and being able to move forward as a campus whole and get the most value there from ORCID. So my question to our presenters is, do you have advice for other institutions that maybe have not started those cross-campus conversations yet? So any advice that you may have to share in terms of, how did you get other stakeholders on board, or, how did that communication get opened up at your campus, and any advice that you may have to share there?
This is Tiffany with FSU again. I will say that creating our ORCID task force at FSU has been very, very helpful for that coordination. It was started here at FSU really by several entities, several individuals in the university libraries. And I am actually working on my MLIS, and so I had strong interest in ORCID myself, and so it was really kind of just a back and forth excitement that started snowballing, and we mentioned it to my vice president. She was really interested in it, and again, it just kind of took off from there. The creation of our task force really just kind of chose select individuals from the big components that made sense to us on campus. Again, we have our MAG lab, which is very, of course, research oriented, so it made sense for that aspect. Librarians, and here in faculty development and advancement, obviously we are concerned with, retaining and recording and analyzing our faculty research. So it just kind of made sense. But I would definitely urge any of the universities that are interested in doing this type of thing to just keep that communication open and try to find some key players on campus to create their own little task force or group.
Awesome, thanks Tiffany. Any other words of wisdom from our presenters? Oh, great. I see some responses in the chat there. So getting the attention of someone or multiple someones near the top, so upper level administrators, deans, that kind of thing, which that is actually something that we've seen also be very effective in terms of the outreach and education component and just encouraging researchers to actually get their ORCID ID and connect it with your system if you do have an integration. That support and encouragement from upper level administrators has shown to be quite effective. Julie also says, ease your timeline expectations and know exactly what resources and time you have to offer so that you can set their expectations of you. I think that's great advice, that shared expectations, always a very key factor in collaborative efforts. Also seeing a comment from Mark around partnering with communication officers and web dev teams from various colleges has been crucial to bringing attention to the Pure Illinois Expert Project. They love being able to pull data out of the back end to share on their own websites or systems. That's excellent advice. Again, I think that also points to, we have central campus units like the library, the research office, provost office, that kind of thing, but also thinking about academic units and different colleges that may have a stake in ORCID. They may have faculty profile pages or things like that where ORCID can come into play. So those are really great considerations as well. We are coming up on the hour, so I want to make sure we are able to get to all questions. So if there are any remaining questions, please either type those in or unmute yourself and pipe up. And while you're thinking about potential questions, of course, remember you can always send an email to orcidus@lyrasis.org with new questions that may arise after this, once you've had a chance for all this information to soak in. And I would be happy to consult with anyone kind of individually to go more in depth with your own local situation in terms of ORCID and the systems you're using and how you might be able to leverage that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions right now, but I do want to make sure to, again, thank you to all of our presenters for sharing their case studies today. I think it's been really great hearing from everybody, and I hope this has stimulated some ideas and can lead to more discussion in the future. This recording will be sent out to everyone who registered, as well as a link to our slides, so you'll have access to all the links and things there. So just stay tuned for an email with that information. And with that, I think we can go ahead and conclude, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.